A rancher saves a wounded Apache, then 1,000 warriors arrive at dawn. The sun was beginning to dip beneath the horizon, casting a golden glow across the vast plains of the colony. Dust stirred in the dry air as the sound of hooves echoed through the open land. Jake Marshall, a rancher by trade, sat atop his weathered horse, gazing out across the flat landscape. His ranch stretched for miles, bordered by rocky outcrops and dry hills, with nothing but cattle and the open sky for company. Jake wasn't much for company. Out here, in the vast emptiness, he preferred the quiet life. The endless horizon was his only companion, the cattle his only business. But even out here, in the stillness of his solitude, he couldn't ignore the strange feeling that something was different today. Something was off. He couldn't put his finger on it, but the feeling gnawed at him as the sun began to set. As the light waned, Jake's horse picked its way carefully through the rocky ground. The sounds of the prairie seemed louder as dusk settled, chirping insects, the distant rustling of the wind through the grass, and something else. A faint cry, almost like a whisper, caught his attention. His eyes narrowed. He had lived on these plains for years, but he knew the sounds of the land, and this wasn't one of them. Tightening his grip on the reins, Jake urged his horse forward. The path curved around a hill, and just beyond it, lying in the brush, was a figure. At first Jake thought it might be some poor soul who had fallen to the land, someone caught by the unforgiving desert. But as he rode closer, the truth became clear. It was a woman, her body bruised and bloodied, her clothes torn. She lay sprawled on the ground, her dark hair fanning out around her like a tangled mess of threads. Jake's heart skipped a beat. She was Apache. Her features were sharp, her skin a rich bronze that blended into the desert surroundings. Her eyes, though barely open, held a defiance that struck him even in her weak state. The sound of her labored breathing was the only thing that broke the silence. Jake dismounted quickly, his boots hitting the dry earth with a soft thud. He moved cautiously, unsure if she was friend or foe, but the instinct to help overpowered any hesitation. He crouched down beside her, his calloused hands reaching for her arm. "Hey there, you're all right," Jake muttered, more to himself than her, as he checked for any immediate injuries. The woman's body was covered in cuts, scrapes, and bruises, some of them deep, likely from a brutal encounter. Her breathing was shallow, and her lips were dry. She had clearly been out here for too long without water. Jake's mind raced. Apache warriors were known to be fierce, their people living by a strict code of honor. It was rare for one to be in such a vulnerable state, especially alone. He glanced around, scanning the horizon for any signs of pursuit, but saw nothing. His ranch was miles away from any Apache settlements, so what had brought her here, and why was she alone? Her eyes fluttered, and she groaned softly. It seemed like she was fighting to stay conscious. Jake could see she was trying to push herself up, but her body wouldn't cooperate. No, don't move," Jake said softly, his hands pressing gently on her shoulder to keep her down. "You need rest." Her eyes flickered to his, then quickly turned away, as if trying to distance herself from the stranger who had found her. "Leave me. I don't trust you," she muttered, her voice barely a whisper. Jake raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm just trying to help." She shook her head, clearly in pain, but still strong in her defiance. "You're human. You can't help me," she whispered. Jake didn't know what she meant by that. He had seen enough trouble in his life, but this was different. There was something about her will, that made him pause. He wasn't sure how much longer she would survive on her own, so he made a decision. He couldn't just leave her here to die. "I'm taking you back to my place," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "You'll be safe there." At first she didn't respond, but then her eyes narrowed and she glanced up at him, sizing him up. Her gaze lingered on the rifle strapped to his back. She seemed to hesitate, clearly weighing her options, but the fight was leaving her. She could hardly stay awake, let alone defend herself. "Please, just leave," she murmured. But it was clear she had given up. Her body slumped back against the ground and her eyes fluttered shut. Jake didn't wait. He gathered her carefully in his arms, lifting her as gently as he could. She felt light in his arms, but her weight seemed to carry the burden of 1,000 questions. He rode back to his ranch, the horse's hooves echoing in the night. The ranch was a small one, tucked away in the corner of the plains, far enough from the nearest town that it felt like another world entirely. He had lived there alone for years, away from the bustle of society. It was simple, just him, the cattle, and the open sky. But tonight, he wasn't alone. Tonight he carried a wounded woman into his home, and everything about his life felt like it was about to change. As he reached the barn, he dismounted and carefully placed her on the porch. Her breathing was still shallow, but she seemed a little more relaxed now that she was no longer in danger of the elements. He opened the door to his modest cabin and carried her inside. The fire on the hearth crackled, casting a warm glow across the room, but it did little to warm the cold that had crept into Jake's chest. He set her down gently on his bed, then moved to get some water. He returned with a small bowl, using a rag to clean her wounds as best he could. She flinched a few times, but didn't wake. He worked quietly, knowing she needed rest and time to heal. When he finished, he sat back in the worn chair by the fire and watched her for a moment. The night had fallen fully now, and the silence of the plains had returned. But Jake couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The land had a way of making you feel that way. He stood up, stepping out into the cool night air. The wind was sharp now, biting at his skin. He gazed out into the distance, wondering if there were others out there, watching, waiting. It was hard to tell. Inside, the Apache woman slept, unaware of the storm that was brewing just beyond the horizon. And Jake had a feeling that whatever was coming, he was about to face it head on. The night passed slowly, each minute stretching longer than the last. Jake sat by the fire, eyes constantly drifting to the sleeping woman on the bed. Her name, Kalia, echoed in his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that her presence here was more than just an accident. Something told him that by the time dawn came, his life would be changed forever. Outside, the wind picked up, sweeping dust across the dry earth. It was a constant, familiar noise in the desert, but tonight it sounded different. There was a weight to it, a foreboding tone that made Jake's skin prickle. He checked on Kalia again, adjusting the blanket around her. She hadn't moved much, and though her breathing was slow and steady, there was something about the way her body lay, like she was waiting for something. Jake couldn't figure out what that something might be, but it unsettled him. He stepped back from the bed and stood by the window, staring out into the dark, empty expanse. The first few stars appeared in the sky, but Jake couldn't focus on them. His thoughts raced in circles. Who had attacked her? Why was she alone in this part of the world? The questions gnawed at him, and despite his tiredness, he couldn't stop himself from pacing. The quiet of the ranch felt like a lie now, as though the calmness of the night was hiding something far worse, something just beyond the horizon. As the hours passed, the wind began to howl louder, rattling the wooden walls of the cabin. It felt as though the whole land was holding its breath, waiting. Around midnight, Jake finally lay down on the worn couch in the corner of the cabin. He shut his eyes, but sleep didn't come. Instead, he kept hearing the sounds of hooves echoing in the back of his mind. One, then two, then more. A wave of riders. He shook his head, trying to push the thought away, but it lingered. He had no reason to believe anyone was coming. No reason, other than the unease that had settled into his bones. He wasn't sure how long he had been drifting in and out of light sleep, but the sudden sound of a sharp cry outside woke him with a jolt. Jake shot to his feet, his heart pounding. His hand went immediately to the rifle that hung by the door, but before he could reach it, the door to the cabin burst open with a loud crash. Kalia stood there, her face pale and sweat-slick, her body trembling. Her eyes were wide with fear. She looked like she had just woken from a nightmare, or something worse. "Get up," she gasped, her voice tight with panic. "They're coming." Jake didn't need to ask who she meant. He grabbed his rifle and rushed to the door. Outside, the wind was biting, and the night sky was nearly black, save for the faint light of the stars. His eyes scanned the distance, but there was nothing. Not yet. "The warriors?" Jake asked, his voice steady despite the rising tension in his chest. Kalia nodded quickly. "They know I'm here."
"It will not forgive me for..."
She backed away from the door, her eyes never leaving the horizon. "We don't have much time." Jake stepped outside, the cold air hitting him like a slap in the face. He looked toward the ridge in the distance, barely visible against the night sky. At first there was nothing, just the flickering shadows of the desert. Then, like a wave crashing on a shore, a dark figure appeared on the ridge, followed by another and another. Before long, the entire horizon was filled with movement. Dozens, then hundreds. 1,000 Apache warriors, riding toward the ranch in perfect unity, their horses galloping with a rhythmic power that made the ground shake. The sight sent a chill through Jake's spine. This wasn't just a group of riders. This was an army. Kalia stepped up beside him, her face set in a mask of grim determination. "They won't stop," she said quietly. "They're my people, but they will not spare you for helping me." Jake turned to look at her, his heart pounding in his chest. He hadn't expected this. He had no idea what to do. He was a rancher, not a fighter. He had lived his life in peace, away from the conflicts of the world. But now, that world had come to him. "We need to leave," Carlia urged. "They will kill you." Jake hesitated for a moment, then looked back at the approaching army. His hand tightened around his rifle. He had to make a choice. Could he just turn his back on everything, on this woman, and run? Could he live with that? He wasn't sure. He had never been a man of action, but he knew one thing for sure. He wouldn't run. "They won't stop," Kalia repeated, her voice low but forceful. "And if they find me gone, they'll think you took me prisoner." That's worse. Jake glanced over his shoulder at the ranch house. His ranch. His land. But it didn't feel like his land anymore. Not with 1,000 warriors heading straight for it. Kalia caught his gaze and spoke again, quieter this time. "We have to go. We can't win this." The sound of the riders grew louder, like thunder rolling across the plains. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of earth and metal, of battle. Jake made up his mind. "Get on the horse, we ride." Without another word, Kalia hurried to the barn. Jake followed her, feeling the weight of the decision settle on his shoulders. This wasn't the fight he had wanted. It wasn't even a fight he had prepared for. But it was a fight he couldn't back away from. He saddled his horse quickly, the urgency of the situation making every movement sharp and decisive. Callie had joined him, her own horse already ready. The two of them rode out into the night, away from the approaching warriors, toward the unknown. As they rode, Jake glanced back once, catching a glimpse of the 1,000 riders, their figures now just silhouettes against the rising moon. The warriors were fast, and they would not stop until they had what they came for. But Jake wasn't about to let them catch him without a fight. They rode hard, the sound of pounding hooves filling the night, but Jake couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't enough. They were outnumbered. No matter how fast they rode, no matter how far they ran, the Apache warriors would not stop, and soon they would be surrounded. Kalia, silent beside him, kept her eyes focused ahead, but Jake could see the fear in her eyes. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something far greater, something far more dangerous. Jake didn't know what the dawn would bring, but he knew this. The rancher who had lived in peace was about to face the greatest test of his life. And he wasn't sure if he would make it out alive. The night was still heavy with the sound of galloping hooves. Jake and Kalia rode side by side, their horses cutting through the desert like two shadows under the moonlight. The wind whipped against them, carrying with it the scent of dust and impending danger. Jake's mind raced, but it couldn't keep up with the pounding of his heart. They had ridden hard for what felt like hours, the landscape around them shifting into unfamiliar terrain. The ranch was far behind now, swallowed by the dark horizon. Jake stole a glance at Kalia, her face a mask of calm, but he could see the tension in her posture, the way her hands gripped the reins tightly, as if she were preparing for something far worse than just a chase. "Do you think they'll follow us?" Jake asked, his voice low but steady, trying to break the silence that had settled between them. Kalia's eyes remained fixed ahead, her expression unreadable. "They will," she said quietly. "And soon. The tribe won't rest until they have me back. The ones who followed me, they're not men you want to face." Jake swallowed. He had suspected as much. Apache warriors were known for their strength and fearlessness, but Kalia's tone hinted at something darker, something far more dangerous than he had ever faced. His mind flashed to the 1,000 warriors he had seen earlier, their black silhouettes standing against the moonlit sky. Even now he could feel the weight of their pursuit hanging over him like a storm cloud. The trail was narrow, winding between jagged rocks and sparse brush. The path grew steeper, forcing the horses to slow down as they navigated through the terrain. Jake could hear the occasional call of a distant animal, but the world felt eerily quiet, as though the land itself was waiting. "Where are we headed?" Jake asked, his voice a little more urgent now. He couldn't help but feel that they were running out of time, and yet he didn't know where they were running to. Kalia's gaze shifted briefly toward him, and for a moment he saw something soft, a glimmer of gratitude, perhaps. "I have a place," she said. "It's hidden, far from the tribe's reach, but we must hurry. We don't have much time." Jake nodded, trusting her words. He had no other choice. He wasn't sure what was coming, but he knew they couldn't stay out in the open, not with 1,000 warriors on their trail. Minutes passed, stretching into an eternity. Jake kept his eyes on the path ahead, his thoughts tangled in confusion. He had never been in a situation like this before. He was a rancher, not a soldier. He had spent his days working the land, caring for his cattle, living a simple life. Now he was caught in a battle that wasn't his own. Kalia broke the silence, her voice barely a whisper over the wind. You don't have to do this, you know. I didn't ask for your help. Jake looked at her, his brow furrowing. I didn't do it because you asked. I did it because you needed help, and because no one else would. Kalia turned her head slightly, studying him with those sharp, calculating eyes. You don't understand, she said, her voice tinged with sorrow. By helping me, you've put yourself in danger. You've made a choice, one that will come with consequences. Jake felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He knew that helping her had consequences, but he had never considered what those consequences might mean for him, for his future. He had always been a man who acted with honor, but now that honor felt like a heavy burden. I'm not running from it, Jake replied, his voice firm. I made a choice, and I'll see it through. Kalia fell silent again, and for a long while they rode in the dark, the only sounds the steady rhythm of hooves and the soft sigh of the wind. The path began to wind down, and soon they came to a narrow ravine. The ground was soft here, the earth giving way beneath the horses' hooves. They slowed, the terrain forcing them to focus on their steps. It was as if the land itself was drawing them into its depths, into some hidden place. Kalia led the way, her movements confident, as though she had been here before. Jake followed, his mind still racing. He wasn't sure what to expect next, but the tension in the air was thick. He couldn't help but feel the weight of the decision he had made, a decision that now felt heavier than ever. They reached a small clearing at the bottom of the ravine. The moonlight barely reached the ground here, casting everything in shadow. Kalia stopped and dismounted, her movements swift and purposeful. Jake followed, his boots crunching softly on the dry earth. This is it, Kalia said, her voice low. She glanced over her shoulder at him, her eyes dark with unspoken thoughts. We'll wait here until dawn. Then we'll figure out what to do. Jake looked around the small, hidden clearing. It felt like a sanctuary, but it also felt temporary, as if it was only a matter of time before the warriors found them. He could feel the weight of the night pressing down on him, the uncertainty of what was to come. They set up camp quickly, gathering what little supplies they had. The fire flickered in the center of the clearing, casting long shadows on the rocks. Kalia sat near the fire, her eyes distanced, lost in her own thoughts. Jake sat across from her, his mind racing, but unable to find any answers. We can't run forever, Jake said, breaking the silence. They'll catch up to us eventually. Kalia didn't respond immediately. She simply stared into the fire, the flames reflecting in her eyes. After a moment she spoke, her voice calm but tinged with something deeper. I never wanted to be the cause of this. My people, they don't understand. They think I've betrayed them, but I haven't. I was only trying to protect them. Jake listened, feeling the weight of her words. He had no way of fully understanding what she was going through, what it meant to be part of a tribe, to be torn between duty and survival. But he could feel the depth of her struggle, and he couldn't help but respect it. You don't have to fight for me, Kalia said, her voice soft but firm. You've done enough. Jake shook his head. I'm not fighting for you, Kalia. I'm fighting for what's right, and that's something I'll stand by. Kalia met his gaze then, and for a moment their eyes locked. There was something in that look, something unspoken but understood. Jake wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew this much. Whatever happened, he wouldn't back down. He had chosen a path, and he would walk it, no matter the cost. The night stretched on, the fire crackling softly in the still air. Jake and Kalia sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, but bound by the same undeniable truth. The next day would bring a battle, one that neither of them could avoid. And as the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, the sound of hooves could be heard in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. As dawn broke, the first light of morning stretched across the horizon, casting a soft golden glow on the desert plains. The sky, once a dark, endless void, was now painted with hues of orange and pink. It was beautiful, in a way, but the beauty did little to ease the tension that hung in the air. Jake could feel it pressing down on him like a weight he couldn't shake off. He had made a choice, and now there was no turning back. He looked across the small clearing at Kalia, who was crouched by the fire, her eyes scanning the surrounding land. Her face was set in a firm expression, a mask of strength, but Jake could see the anxiety beneath it. Her shoulders were tense, and her hands gripped the hilt of her knife, though she hadn't spoken in hours. Jake's heart ached for her, for the struggle she was facing. She was caught between two worlds, and neither offered any real escape. They're getting closer, Jake muttered, his voice barely more than a whisper. He stood up, feeling the weight of the rifle on his back. It was the only weapon he had, and though he was no soldier, he had no intention of going down without a fight. Kalia nodded, her gaze never leaving the horizon. She had been a warrior once, and though she was not a threat to Jake, She knew what was coming. My people won't stop until I'm either with them or dead. Jake clenched his jaw, his fists tightening around the rifle. He knew that Kalia was right, and yet he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about her anymore. This was about survival, about doing what was right even when the odds were stacked against him. The sound of the warrior's approach was growing louder now, echoing through the desert like the rumble of thunder before a storm. The moment had come. Jake and Kalia had spent the last few hours preparing for this. They had checked their gear, gathered what little they had left, and tried to plan. But now, standing in the clearing, the reality of their situation hit him like a cold wind. There were 1,000 warriors out there, and only 2 of them. Kalia stood up slowly, her eyes meeting Jake's for the first time in hours. She didn't say anything at first, but there was an understanding between them now, a silent acknowledgement of the danger they faced. She had never asked him to fight for her, but here they were, caught in a battle neither of them had chosen. "Are you ready?" Jake asked, his voice steady despite the storm inside him.
Mm-hmm.
Kalia nodded. "I am. But I don't want you to die for me. You don't owe me that." Jake smiled grimly. "I didn't come this far to turn back now. We do this together. No one is dying today." For a moment, they just stood there, side by side, looking out at the vast desert. The silence between them was thick with the weight of the choices they had made and the battle that was about to begin. But as the sound of the hooves grew louder, Jake felt his heart race. This was no longer just a fight for Kalia's life. It was a fight for his own, and for the life of everything he had built. Suddenly, a figure appeared on the ridge, silhouetted against the rising sun. It was the leader of the Apache warriors, the man who would decide their fate, Chief Nolan. His presence alone was enough to make Jake's blood run cold. Nolan was a giant of a man, known for his brutal ways and unwavering loyalty to his tribe. Jake had heard the stories. They all spoke of him in hushed tones, as though his name alone could strike fear into the hearts of men. Behind Nolan, a sea of warriors appeared, their horses galloping across the plains, 1,000 of them, all moving in perfect harmony, their eyes fixed on the 2 figures in the clearing. It was an army, and they weren't here for a negotiation. They were here for blood. Jake and Kalia exchanged a brief glance, and in that moment, everything seemed to stand still. There was no more time for questions, no more time for second thoughts. The only thing that mattered now was survival. Kalia stepped forward, her stance strong and steady, her hand resting on the hilt of her knife. She didn't look at Jake as she spoke, her voice low but firm. "I'll speak to him," she said. "If anyone can reason with him, it's me." Jake shook his head, taking a step closer. "This isn't your fight anymore. I'm not letting them take you." Kalia turned to face him, her eyes soft with regret. "Jake, this is my tribe."
You can't change that.
"You don't know what they'll do if we don't go with them." Jake's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He knew she was right, but he wasn't about to stand down. He had made a promise to himself, and to her, that he wouldn't let anything happen to her. He wasn't going to let 1,000 warriors decide her fate. Nolan and his warriors came to a stop at the edge of the clearing, the sound of their horses' hooves thundering in the air. The chief dismounted, his massive form towering over the others. He stepped forward, his eyes locked on Kalia. His voice was deep and commanding, and it seemed to shake the very ground beneath them. "Kalia," he said, his voice booming, "you have betrayed your people. You have abandoned your tribe. You have made your choice. And now you must answer for it." Kalia stood tall, her chin lifted in defiance. "I have not betrayed anyone. I have done what I thought was right." Chief Nolan's eyes narrowed. "You have left us to die, and for that, you will pay. You will return to the tribe with us, or we will take you by force." Jake's hand tightened around his rifle. This was it. The moment he had feared had arrived. He wasn't sure what to do, but he knew. One thing, he wasn't going to let them take her. Kalia stepped forward, placing herself between Jake and the chief. "You'll have to kill me first, Nolan." For a moment, there was a tense silence, the 2 leaders facing off, each unwilling to back down. But then something unexpected happened. Chief Nolan's expression softened just for a moment, and his shoulders relaxed. He looked at Kalia, his eyes filled with a strange sadness. "You are strong, Kalia," he said quietly. "Stronger than I ever gave you credit for." Kalia didn't respond. She simply stood her ground, her eyes locked on his. The battle was not just about who would win or lose. It was about honor and survival. And in that moment, Jake realized that Kalia had already won, in her own way. She had stood up for what she believed in, and no matter what happened next, that was something worth fighting for. Nolan sighed, the weight of the decision settling on him. "We will not take you by force," he said. "But know this, Kalia, your place is among your people, and your choices have consequences." Kalia nodded, her expression softening. "I know." With a final glance at Jake, Kalia turned toward her people. She knew the battle was over, but the war was far from finished. There was no easy path forward, but she had found the strength to make the choice that was hers alone to make. As the warriors turned and began to ride back into the distance, Jake stood silently, watching them go. He had fought for what he believed in, and now he was left to pick up the pieces of a world that had changed forever. He didn't know what the future would bring, but he knew this: he had done the right thing, and that was enough for now.